It's time to pick a side. The Border War is on the air with BG and Tan.
All right, gang, welcome into episode 146 of the Border War. I am the Tan Man, and contrary to the intro announcement, there is no BG this week. He is taking care of some personal issues, some personal matters that need tending to. So the Tan Man flying solo for 146. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the upcoming college basketball season. Right around the corner, probably less than an hour or so away from the big tip-off in Madison Square Garden with the Champions Classic. So we're going to be talking some ACC and some SEC basketball. But before we do, take care of a little housekeeping. You can follow the show on Twitter at The Border War. I can be followed at TanMan, at Tar Heel TanMan, and BG is at BG_Border War. We can also follow along with us on Facebook. Just search for the Border War Podcast, and be sure to like and subscribe to the show, whichever platform you consume your podcast with, whatever it is, we're on it. If you have one that you prefer and we are not on there, let us know, and we'll certainly do what we can to make that happen for you. All right, like I just said, the college basketball season, some games are underway, have already started, already gone final, some of them I'm sure, but the main event for opening night, the Champions Classic, Duke and Kansas, followed by Michigan State and Kentucky. And before we get into the meat of the show, big picture, look, this is not a typical college basketball season from what we have come to expect the last few years, where there has been one or two dominant teams. I know this time last year the talk was, well, was anybody going to beat Duke? In years past, Kentucky has gotten that label. Is anybody going to beat Kentucky? We've seen Villanova a couple of years ago kind of start the season near the top and run all the way through and finish the season there. This year, I don't know if we have that team. Michigan State is starting off number one. They probably deserve to be there, but if you would have said Kansas is number one, I wouldn't have argued with you. And the same thing with a couple other teams. As far as, like I said, the usual suspects are there near the top. If you want to talk about potential sleepers come the end of the season, potential Final Four teams, who can make a run, who can shock some teams, maybe a team like Seton Hall is who you're looking for. Maybe a team like Memphis. Personally, I'm a little higher on the Pac-12 than most people are in most years, with Washington and Arizona and Oregon. So maybe some of these other teams are going to jump up from the middle of the rankings right now. And look, maybe there's somebody we don't even know. We're not even talking about. We have no idea, no idea who they are is going to make that run. That's what makes college basketball so fantastic. But like I said, in our box, we're going to stay and start with the granddaddy of them all, the big kahuna. When it comes to college basketball, we're going with the ACC. And look, we're going to start with the Clemson Tigers. Clemson is a team that, unfortunately for Tiger fans, I'm going to give you my top four teams in the ACC and the SEC. And unfortunately, Tiger fans, you're not going to be, some technical difficulties. You're not going to be in that mix if you're a Clemson fan. They have lost a lot. They made the Sweet 16 run just a few years ago. But off that team, you've lost guy after guy this past year. Shelton Mitchell and Marquise Reed, they're out, along with the big man they had, Elijah Thomas. There it is. Elijah Thomas is gone, and basically Clemson is relying on, again, a couple transfers. Brad Brownell has hit the transfer market in the past. He's done a good job with it, and he's hoping to strike gold again this year with Kevon Moore. But look, outside of that, they're really relying on a lot of unproven folks down in Tiger Town. They're hoping Amir Sims, as Elijah Thomas's backup, spelled him nicely. They're hoping Amir Sims can take over that role that Thomas had and really be the backbone of this team. But other than that, I'm afraid it's going to be a long season in Clemson for Clemson basketball fans. and maybe Brad Brownell. Maybe this is exactly what Clemson fans need to move on from the Brad Brownell era. He's kind of gotten that Jason Garrett label, like I've given some other coaches around the country, where he always seems to do just enough to keep his job. This might finally be the end run for Brownell and Clemson. It's hard for me to picture Clemson finishing anywhere above 15-10. It's hard for me to picture them finishing anywhere above 10, and I really wouldn't be surprised if they're somewhere around 12 or 13 as well. Former Wofford coach Mike Young takes over at Virginia Tech. He might have the toughest job of anybody in the conference right now. So I think Clemson will finish ahead of them, and outside of that, I don't really see a lot of guaranteed gimmies on the Tigers' schedule. The other ACC team in our box, of course, is, you guessed it, my team, the North Carolina Tar Heels. Look, North Carolina's got some question marks coming into this season, perhaps more so than they have had in a number of years. The star of the show, Cole Anthony. Look, the Tar Heels are going to go as far as Cole Anthony can take them. North Carolina point guards, that's typically the way it is. I think more so this year than ever. I think Anthony is I think he'll be able to get other guys involved a little better than Kobe White did. For as great as Kobe White was, he was more of a scorer than a facilitator. And Anthony kind of, he can score. Don't get me wrong, he can put the ball in the hoop. Don't make no mistake about it. But I think he gets other people involved a little bit better than White does. So that should open things up. But look, Luke May is not coming back. Nasir Little, Kobe White, Cam Johnson, Kenny Williams. Look, that's an awful lot of talent that walked out the door. And coming in to replace that talent, Roy Williams dipped into the transfer market. He got a couple grad transfers. One, Christian Keeling from Charleston Southern. The other, Justin Pierce, the wing from William and Mary. As far as Keeling goes, he may start. I believe he started the exhibition game the other night. He's had some good games when they've played tougher competition, but it's always tough to judge how those kind of players will acclimate themselves to playing that ACC schedule, that ACC team night, when you have to go from playing Louisville to playing Virginia to playing Syracuse to playing Duke night after night after night after night, as opposed to just having to get yourself up to play this one game at a smaller school when you go on the road. It is a big question mark. He's a talented kid, but again, we'll see how he does with that grind of an ACC schedule night after night. Some other things we're really looking forward to. Another big-time freshman, Armando Bacot, comes in, big man. He's going to slide Garrison Brooks out from that center spot, more to the power forward spot. With Luke May, that position became one where that position went out and shot the ball from the outside a little bit. Not the typical Roy Williams team. Brooks not going to go out there and do that, but he is going to have to pick up his offensive game a little bit. Look, North Carolina bigs have a history of this. We've seen here lately Sean May, the jump between his sophomore and his junior season under Roy Williams. You look, Bryce Johnson, between his junior and really his first 3 years, but up to a senior season that nobody really saw coming. I figured he'd be good, not that good. Isaiah Hicks, Kennedy Meeks, two more big guys that made a jump late in their careers under Roy Williams as bigs. I think Garrison Brooks is he's going to have to fit that mold if North Carolina is going to go and reach the heights that they are accustomed to. But the big thing with North Carolina, right now, the big bugaboo coming out of the preseason, a day away from the first game of the season, is turnovers, guys. If you saw the exhibition game against Winston-Salem State the other night, I don't know what they ended up with. If it wasn't 20, if it wasn't in the 20s, it was darn close. Turnovers are a problem right now. And with a young team, you've got Cole Anthony, of course, the freshman, but Leaky Black, he's going to be handling some point guard duties. Didn't play a ton last year. Andrew Platek may play some point early on. I'm not sure. But again, his minutes probably got cut in half last year from where they did his freshman season. So if North Carolina is going to reach those heights, they've got to do something about those turnovers. And again, if turnovers is 1A, then health is 1B. Right now they're dealing with the loss of Brandon Robinson. He's going to be out for a little while, hopefully not too long, after his ankle injury coming out of that exhibition game. But Sterling Manley still has not practiced, has not played anything. He's dealing with knee injuries. They brought in 2 kids who are dealing with knee injuries of their own. So look, I think Roy Williams said the other week that he didn't have enough guys to run a practice, and so look, health is a big thing because we've got a lot of bodies, and he's going to play a lot of kids, but we don't have the luxury of having guys get banged up and losing guys. Listen, we've got talented kids, but we don't have transcendent talented kids right now, and the one guy that they're really counting on to make a big jump this year, besides Garrison Brooks, that they're leaning on, that veteran voice, is going to be Brandon Robinson. So hopefully he'll get healed up fast, and the Tar Heels will be ready to go. But as far as the rest of the ACC goes, my top 4 look like this. I've got Louisville. A lot of folks really high on the Cardinals. Jordan Nwora took a big jump between his sophomore and his junior season. I don't know that there's another big jump like that to justify going from 7th in the conference to top 5 in the country, but nevertheless, that's where they are now. I've got Louisville at 4. I've got Virginia at 3, and it's because a Tony Bennett coach team is only going to drop so far on a down season this year. Losing Ty Jerome, Kyle Guy, DeAndre Hunter, I expect Virginia to take a step back, but not that many steps back. They open up the season at Syracuse. They get North Carolina at home for their second conference game the first weekend of December. And then the rest of the way, the Virginia road trips, they look like they get Louisville the last game of the season. And in between that, they've got a trip to Tallahassee and a trip to North Carolina. Other than that, the schedule looks to be really manageable. Their tougher games will be at home. Duke's, NC State, Notre Dame, those are home-only games. So they've got a pretty manageable schedule in between the start of the conference play and the very last game of the season, where I think that Virginia is going to find themselves. They may struggle a little offensively. The defense is going to be there, and as they find themselves over the course of the season, the schedule is going to work out well for them. So I've got Louisville at 3. I've got Duke at 2. No Zion Williamson, no R.J. Barrett, no Cam Reddish. Look, I couldn't get it done with those guys. Now, you can't get it done with those guys. He convinced me that you're going to get it done without them. They bring in, of course, the usual really good players. Trey Jones flirted with the NBA draft, which I never really understood. But he comes back for his sophomore season. And really, I've got Carolina at 1, and it's based off this. Last year, the last few years, Duke and Carolina have kind of flip-flopped. North Carolina was always the play 2 big guys, beat you from the inside to the inside out. And Duke always would want to spread the floor, shoot the 3, and beat you from the outside in. Well, this year, they have reverted back to that, and for the talent that Duke has brought in, you're talking about Matthew Hurt as a stretch 4. He can go out there and shoot it, but is he gonna? Has he got the junk in the trunk to get down on the block and defend a guy like Garrison Brooks with his size? I don't know. But Vernon Carey, the big man down low for the Blue Devils, the freshman, he's the real deal, folks. He's the real. He may wind up being, if it's not Cole Anthony, he may wind up being the ACC Player of the Year. But I've got Duke at 2, and I've got North Carolina at 1. Call me a homer. It is what it is. Over to the SEC, a conference that has been much maligned over the course of the years, and slowly but surely they have built a heck of a conference down there. Before the last few years, it's been hiring a new coach, and they've loaded up on great coaches. This offseason, no different. Nate Oates comes down to Tuscaloosa from Buffalo to take over Alabama. Eric Musselman comes over from Arkansas from Nevada, And Buzz Williams leaves Virginia Tech to go to Texas A&M, and a nice raise there. So the SEC, again, just flat loaded with great coaches. Frank Martin is in that mix, and the Gamecocks have a tall task as they look to replace Chris Silva. He's no longer there in South Carolina. He's no longer Frank Martin's consummate whipping boy. My guess is that's going to fall to Mike Kotsar now. Silva was a guy, we always knew the talent was there, and for whatever reason, the motor didn't always run. When the motor ran, he was pretty fantastic, but it didn't always run, or it didn't always run, hum along like Frank Martin would have liked. I have a feeling that Mike Kotsar might want to invest in a saddle because Frank Martin's going to ride him like Zorro all season. But the big man does return. This is a team that's got a lot of depth when they're healthy. I think Keyshawn Bryant is dealing with a knee injury right now. Frank Martin has said before that it's similar to what Justin Minaya dealt with last year. So we'll see how long that keeps him out. Martin said he's going to miss quite a bit of time or something to that effect. So if he hits the floor at all, we'll see. But aside from that, I think this is a really deep South Carolina team, but also a really young South Carolina team. A lot of freshmen, a lot of sophomores here. I'm interested to see Jermaine Couisnard come in. He was a big get for Frank Martin a couple years ago. 4-star kid out of Philadelphia. Didn't really get going last year. I'm not sure if it was grades or injury or what it was that kept him out, but he didn't really get going. So he's took a redshirt year. So he is going to play a big part. But also two big guys that Frank Martin brought in this past season, Wildens Levesque and Jalen McCreary. Levesque 6'10", 230. McCreary goes 6'7", 225. Two guys down low that Martin really likes, but he's got, he said the other day after their exhibition, they've got to buy in a little more at the defensive end. But outside of that, look, Mike Kotsar and the George Washington transfer, Jair Bolden, really the only upperclassman that Martin's got this year. He's got Seventh Woods, who's sitting out as a transfer. I think he'll do a great job in practice, getting some of these young guys, mentoring some of these young guys. I think he did a lot of that last year in Chapel Hill with Kobe White. They had a great relationship, and I think despite what he did or didn't do on the floor, I thought that was a big loss for North Carolina. Our big loss is South Carolina's big game, because I think having Seventh Woods in practice in that locker room is going to be fantastic for those young guys. As far as big picture for South Carolina, listen, they finished fourth in the conference last year. They were 11-7. They had a big win over Auburn during the season, but come Selection Sunday, they got left out. It didn't sound like they were really even on the bubble, and it's because they could not win games early. Right? They could not win games in November and December, and so for everybody out there who tells you, college basketball doesn't matter until March, I don't watch college basketball until March, wake me up when the tournament starts, take a rock and beat them over the head and smack them. Listen, when they say that, point them in the direction of Frank Martin in South Carolina, because these games that quote don't matter, these are what kept South Carolina out of the NCAA tournament and at home last year. Particularly that loss to Wyoming. When you look over the South Carolina non-conference schedule, it is challenging, but it's not challenging enough that it's gonna beat you down and grind you down. It's a good schedule. They've got Gardner-Webb coming off of a tournament run last year. They play Wichita State. They may play Northern Iowa or West Virginia in that Cancun Classic. They've got a trip to Virginia. They play Houston at home. Both of those two teams made tournament runs last year, but they lost some key pieces. So this is a schedule that is not going to beat South Carolina again. It's not going to grind them down. It's not going to beat them down. But it's not one that they're going to cakewalk through like they did a few years ago either. And then when they hit conference play, bottom out, because all of a sudden it's not as easy as it was. And this is listen. This is perfect. This is perfect for a growing team, a young team. It's enough to challenge them. And so I think Frank Martin and South Carolina, they have a chance to be really good. if I had to put a number on it, I would pick South Carolina somewhere. A lot of the preseason predictions have them somewhere around 11 or 12. I think that's incredibly low and incredibly disrespectful to the job Frank Martin does. I think they did that last year, and South Carolina wound up finishing 4th. I think South Carolina is going to finish somewhere around 7th or 8th, middle of the pack. And I think they are. I think they could be right on that NCAA bubble, that SEC taking 7 or 8 teams. South Carolina could find themselves maybe at the back end of that come tournament time. But don't be surprised if Frank Martin taps into the magical pixie dust he usually has and has South Carolina somewhere around 4 and 5 and smack dab in the middle of things as well. The rest of the SEC, my top 4 teams in the conference, I think it's very top heavy. I think there's a 3, and then there's a group of about 5 or 6 teams that are going to comprise that middle where you can throw them in the hat. I think Tennessee's in that mix, but losing Grant Williams, losing Admiral Schofield, kind of like Virginia, they're going to take a little bit of a step back. How much, I don't know. They do return some guys. I think Jordan Bone's still there. But, so my 4th team in the conference, I'm going to go Georgia. And I know that's a little bit off the wall. Georgia won 2 conference games last year. What are you doing with them at 4, right? Well, listen, by the end of the Georgia season last year, last 2 weeks of February, heading into March, they had a 4-point loss to LSU, who won the conference, went to the Sweet 16. They had a 1-point loss to Mississippi State, a 1-point loss to Ole Miss, a 3-point loss to Auburn, who probably should have been playing for a national championship, and then a 6-point win over Florida. All those teams went to the NCAA tournament with the exception of Mississippi State. I think they went to the NIT. Listen, Georgia was playing their best basketball at the end. They just couldn't figure out how to close the deal. Rashawn Hammonds comes back to school. They add hometown kid, Georgia kid, Anthony Edwards. I think turned down North Carolina for Georgia. So I think the addition to him, we've seen, when you have 1 or 2 fantastic players. We've seen how 1 player, 2 players can change the complete balance of a team. I think that could be the case with Georgia this year. So I've got Georgia as the top of that middle group of teams in the SEC. Number 3, I've got LSU. We'll see how the black cloud of Will Wade and the NCAA scandals and investigations conclude. They lose Naz Reid, but they do return some guys like Skylar Mays and Emmett Williams. There's plenty of talent in Baton Rouge to pick up right where they left off. They kind of used all that stuff as a rallying cry last year, and it was easy then, but we'll see if it starts up again. It's kind of towards the end of the season there. If it starts up again, if it hits maybe a little earlier in the season, do they have enough left in the tank to carry them all the way to the end? If they do, don't be shocked if LSU's at the top of the conference again this year. And number 2, I've got Kentucky. Kentucky, has an oddity. They've got they've got a couple juniors. I know Nick Richards came back. They've got some sophomores. One of those is E.J. Montgomery, the big man. Kind of fell behind P.J. Washington in that post-pecking order in Kentucky last year. There were some recruiting. There were a few recruiting recruiting lists that had Montgomery ahead of Zion Williamson going into last year. But there was a lot of competition, and he kind of fell out. Now it's there. It's his job to take in Lexington. Can he turn it around? They bring in Keon Brooks and Khalil Whitney, two impact freshmen who are gonna take over right away. They bring over Bucknell transfer Nate Sestina, but they're gonna go as Ashton Hagens goes in Lexington. Once they turn the keys over from Quad Green to Hagens last year, it was a totally different Kentucky team, and they found themselves literally a shot away from a Final Four that has eluded John Calipari and the Wildcats for a few years now. And finally, I've got Florida. Maybe that's just me buying into the trendy hype, but they add Virginia Tech transfer Kerry Blackshear to go along with talented freshman point guard Trey Mann. Almost said Trey Young. Trey Mann down in Gainesville. This might be Mike White's best team he's had since he's been there, but what has kind of become the staple of Florida basketball since the back-to-back championship runs by Billy Donovan is that they've kind of underachieved. The total has been less than the sum of their parts the last few years. That Elite Eight run a couple years ago where they lost to South Carolina, notwithstanding, if they can kind of get that monkey off their back, I think Florida could wind up winning the SEC this year. So that's it. ACC top 4 rundown: Carolina, Duke, Virginia, Louisville. I've got Clemson again finishing near the bottom. In the SEC, I've got Florida, Kentucky, LSU, and Georgia, with South Carolina finishing somewhere around 7th or 8th, with a look to maybe climb a little higher. That's it for episode 146. I believe that was correct. Again, you can follow the show at The Border War. Hopefully next week, BG and I will be able to link up, get back together, get you guys another episode or two next week. But for now, hope you enjoyed the ACC SEC Basketball Preview Edition. We're half hour away from tip-off. Folks, go out and watch some college basketball. Have a good week.